When every word matters and the room is watching, how do you communicate with absolute impact? On today's show, we dig into what makes high stakes presentations different from everyday meetings and how to master them when it matters most. And we got an expert in communication and facilitation strategies here to help. Ready? Let's go. Today's guest, Robert J. Petrausch, served as captain in the United States Air Force, served as chief communications officer and chief speechwriter for global Fortune 500 CEOs, and as a professor and professional speaker and facilitator for private and nonprofit organizations. But I'm going to let him take it from here because he'll do a much better job than I will. So we're going to put 2 minutes on the screen for you, Robert. Whenever you're ready, let's roll.
Thanks. Thank you, John. As you know, thank you. My journey, has taken me, as you said, from the United States Air Force, which is government, to global Fortune 500 companies, to private nonprofit organizations as a professor and professional speaker and facilitator. But the question I would like to ask your audience today is think about a critical high stakes moment they have faced as a speaker or professional. Now, for me, it was a job interview for a chief communications officer position, which paid $100,000 at the time. It was the moment of truth, a high stakes situation where I had to influence and persuade decision makers to choose me over other people. My tenure and time at the organization resulted in a significant amount of income for me and service to the organization. For members of your audience, it might be selling a $10,000 revenue streaming product to a company that renews it for 10 years, which would then make it a $100,000 high stakes sales pitch. Your facilitation could help a company management team grow revenues by 10 to 20% a year for 5 years, transforming it into a high stakes engagement. So whether it's a job interview, sales pitch, or facilitation, raising the stakes amplifies our impact and future potential success.
All right. And he got it right in there, folks. He nailed it. Good intro. Now, I'm going to stay with that if you don't mind. I want to dive right into your definition of high stakes presentations, because I think every presentation in its own way is high stakes, but I have a feeling you're going in a slightly different direction other than just money. So what defines it in your mind, and why do so many presenters underestimate this level of pressure?
Yeah. I think, Rob, the reason that they underestimate it is that they take the presentation, even sometimes a high stakes presentation, to present information to the rational side of the brain. So what does that mean? That means they take the information and they say, I'm going to ram down this rational information to the point that the audience will have to understand and accept exactly what I'm saying. What they're missing is that our brains work in two ways. We're influenced by the rational side of the brain, but more importantly, we're influenced by the emotional side of the brain. So essentially what we do is we buy with emotion and we justify with fact.
Right.
If you think of a high level purchase you made recently, you would, if you look back at it, it probably was bought with emotion, but you justified it with fact. I have a sports car, for example, which is a Z3. And it's a great car. When I bought the car, I argued that this is a great resale value. We'll do all the things that I wanted to do, but I really bought it because I wanted to have a sports car. So I bought with emotion, but I justified it with fact.
Now, when you're talking to people, are you trying to, we use what we call a whiffum, what's in it for me?
Yes.
Are you trying to sort of address both sides of that, or are you just reading the topic and audience and aiming at one side or the other?
I think you're basically have to aim at again, you have to think of the audience, both the target audience,
Hmm.
obviously,
Hmm.
and the sub-targets that you may be trying to reach as well. And you have to be thinking about how is that impact going to take place. Now here, you notice I have a topic that I believe we're in the age of speed, which is interesting. And this age of speed is changing the dynamic of how we operate today. I mean, in the analog days of preparing for a presentation, we went through the research and the data and the information, and then we put them on slides, and then we went out and we made the presentation. And we still, to a large extent, do that today. The difference in the age of speed is the way people now, if you look at the fact that you have a social media construct, you have text, apps, people have changed the way that they absorb information, the way they see information. And so in the age of speed, what's happening is we have to, the speakers, professional speakers, and people who give high stakes presentations have to recognize this new dynamic because people are not, they want it quicker, they want it faster, they want it better. They don't want it diluted, but they want the information so it can be connected to them in a way that they can understand and the way they're getting information now. So if you're not thinking like an age of speed speaker, then what's happening is you're losing part of that audience because they're trained now with their information, they're trained now with their social media contact to expect information to come to them in a different way. And even at the high stakes level, you have to be thinking about how you're going to present that information to them
Yeah.
to a
The
large extent.
tagline that for this particular show is
Yeah.
because every presentation matters. It always matters. So let me just pin you down on one last thing, and
Sure.
I'll leave this. I promise.
No, no, no,
But
I'm interested. You're,
but when you say high stakes, I'm trying to think in 40 years of presenting, which one wasn't high stakes for me?
yeah.
And even if I deluded myself and said, well, there are only 9 people in the room, but who are they going to talk to 5 years from now that could be bringing me to my biggest client? So is there a line or are they all high stakes?
Well, high stakes is a lot higher than we think it is,
Hmm.
basically. That's really the art. So the high stakes is really higher than we think it normally is. As I mentioned in my earlier examples, I mean, you can give, as I said, a sales presentation, which you give normally, and that presentation is, could be high as $10,000 revenue item, like we talked about. The difference is if the company, if you expect the company to renew that every 10 years, that's $100,000 presentation.
Right.
So it's moved from a sales pitch to a product presentation to now a high stakes presentation because if you convince them that this product is great or good and they keep it for 10 years, it's $100,000 pitch. That makes the high stakes presentation. That's where it shifts. So what we have to understand is we may be giving a presentation to an audience or a group of people, and it may be on a general matter. The question is, does it go farther than that? And when it can go farther than that, it becomes, in my view, the high stakes presentation. It
Okay.
moves from a general presentation or a management presentation or an information presentation to a high stakes
You
presentation.
got it. Okay, I
Yeah,
got you now. I
yeah,
got you.
yeah.
Almost that internal presentation is not necessarily quite as high stakes
Right.
as
Well, it could,
yeah.
but it could be. Now, if that internal presentation is they're looking at you to get promoted, for example. Let's say
Right.
you're giving that internal presentation inside the organization, and you think that it's a company review product. But what their management team is really doing is looking at all these candidates to see who's going to move up the next ladder for them. Then that's a high stakes, even though you think it's an internal presentation.
Right.
It really is a high stakes presentation for you because if they select you for a management program or to be on the management team, then it becomes a high stakes presentation.
I got you. Well, and
Yeah,
I like our tagline because every presentation matters. All
right.
right. Let's
Absolutely.
drop back to some preparation here. All right,
Yes,
which
right.
is critical for all presentations. And you touched on it for a second. How should we prepare for a high stakes presentation or a high stakes facilitation? That's essential. Let's make it stakeholders or
Yeah,
shareholders.
sure.
Give me a tip or two on how you'd prepare for that.
Well, one of the things that the obviously the typical tip is you're doing your research, you're doing the prep, you're doing the audience analysis, okay, to a large extent. You're doing the audience mapping. Who are the targets? Who are the decision makers? I mean, one of the things that's critical is thinking about the composition of the audience more than that. People sometimes don't think of that. They look at them as a generic audience, but in reality, there are a number of people sitting there. They're decision makers, they're bean counters, there are all sorts of people in that audience, and you need to be able to think about that audience and segment them in a particular way so that when you make your presentation, you're making it to that wider group, not just to the generic audience that you're talking to, because you've got to convince the bean counters, the decision makers, the people who want to feel good about the presentation, the various people in the audiences that you're going to present to. The other thing you have to be asking the question is what do they want to feel, know, and do? What do you want them to feel? Number one. What do you want them to know? Number two. And then most importantly, what do you want them to do?
Right.
Basically. So feel, know, and do is very critical because all you notice that touches on the emotion. The knowledge is what they have to have in that presentation. And then what are you ultimately going to ask them to do? And then finally, what do they need to hear from you?
Yeah.
In other words, the important critical question is not just know, feel, and do, which is very critical, but more importantly, what do they need to do? What do they need to hear from you? And you solidify them. Well, the basics are there: the preparation, the value, knowing who the audience is, the venues, all the things that you would normally do in a typical speech. But you have to take it up a level, and that you have to get them to figure out a way of how you're going to now frame that message to that audience in a particular way. And a lot of people feel they have the structure down of the presentations, but they haven't figured out how they want to frame it
Right.
in the way that's going to be important for that audience to really appreciate and understand and do.
Yeah. You know, I was in a show one time, in my 20s. I did some theater, and it was a musical. And I remember the director looking at me and saying, keep working at this because you want that audience singing your song when they walk out of this theater. And there's a lot of songs they're hearing. So let's move that into this world right now. When you give a talk,
Sure.
we want everybody to remember everything, but there is a rule of thumb in training that says, well, if you emphasize everything, in a sense, you might be emphasizing nothing. We
Right.
got to pick our spots. Any tips on this high stake presentation of assuming it's all important or it wouldn't be there, but boy, if they leave with nothing else, I want them to get this. How do we get them to sing that song?
Well, that's a very good question, Rob. And I think you mentioned earlier you were talking about acting earlier, and you
Hmm.
look. I think we could take a lesson from the improv people, who are out there and who are so successful in their own world in terms of the activity. What we really have to do when we zero down the message or the framing to some extent is we have to. There's a 5 by 5 rule in communications that's often not understood completely, and that is we have to say something at least in the critical message at least 5 times in 5 different ways.
Right.
So if you use that rule 5 times 5 by 5, where you're taking the message and you have to distribute that message critically 5 times throughout the presentation, but in 5 different ways. It could be in the opening, it could be in your slides in terms of your activity. It could be in the story that you tell. It could be in the the final closing that you make. Okay, it could be in different. So five, you have to find the mess. You have to repeat it 5 times in 5 different ways. And if you do that, if you follow that formula 5 by 5, you will get that audience to remember that particular message. They won't forget it, but it has to be subtle, because what you're doing is you're slipping it in 5 different ways. You're not so here I'm repeating this again, I'm repeating this again. No, you're saying it again, maybe in different ways, but you're repeating the key message 5 times, 5 different ways in that presentation, and finding ways to do that. And that will help it stick. The book, famous book, Making It Stick by the Heath brothers,
Oh yeah.
we're familiar with that. I mean, you have to find sticky ways for them to think about, ways to make that stick. And that 5x5 is certainly one of the ways to do that.
Yeah. That is
Yeah.
a wonderful book, by the way. I had me on the first story of the guy
Yeah.
in the bathtub
Yeah.
missing his kidneys or whatever, which
Right.
never happened. And I was like, oh, I'm in.
They're great at that, and they
Yeah,
they really told a great story. And it's all about stickiness and how
right.
you connect with that audience so that they stick with you,
Yep.
or the message sticks with you to a large
Yep.
extent.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to pay a compliment to you. I thought you did a really nice job on that answer, but I want to make sure you're a conscious competent, not an unconscious competent. So I like the way you said 5 times, but the
Yeah.
way you described it was 5 times, but perhaps in 5 different ways. Most people will interpret what you said if they're not careful and say, okay, so I'll say it in the beginning, I'll say it in the middle, I'll say it at the end, I'll say it over coffee.
Yeah.
No, what I heard you say and I like is I might say it in the beginning. I might incorporate it in a story in another area. I might
Right.
show it as a visual over here. I
Right.
might make it a case study with the moral of this. But I think that's really important so that you're really reinforcing, but you're not boring the audience. You're
Right.
just coming at them because we have learners that learn in different ways. You're coming at
Yes.
them from different angles. Anyway, good on you. I was really pleased that you would. I was thinking, ooh, smart guy. He's getting that side of it too. I can tell you've been in front of some audiences.
Well, I've tried to be. And I've tried to practice what I preach where I can. I mean, I'm not perfect either. I have to learn from my own experiences and my own situations. And but I found out if you have some rubrics that you can connect to, then I think those rubrics help you along the way, as you prepare for these presentations. One of the, what always bothered me, uh, Rob, is that when I was trying to give these different high stakes presentations, I would always look for books that would that would help me along the way. And they always had these 1,000 presentation books, which were all good and they all mentioned everything, but rarely did the author, except in a few cases, talk about high stakes presentations.
Right.
And so that forced me, partly being a professional and partly being an academic as well, forced me to write a book on it. Mastering your high stakes presence in the age of speed, because I could not find a formal textbook, except in a few cases, where they talked about the high stakes presentation, because most people address the presentation issue as a generic term. And then they throw in the word, well, you may be in a high stakes situation. So they then make it a high stakes presentation. But you have to think about a lot of things, as you create that. And you have to, and it concerned me that there has to be ways to tell audiences that you're going to be in these high stakes presentations and you have to think about them differently.
Right. Yeah.
Really.
Well, let's stay on that for a second.
Yeah.
In these high stake presentations, you work with leaders, I'm assuming at the very top.
Mhm.
Uh, can you give me one behavior or mindset that they share, something that you learned from a high stake audience, not
Yeah.
on the delivery side, but I'm guessing these are not, underlings frequently out in
Yes.
that
Right.
audience. Give me something that you've learned from that audience.
Well, one of the things, I mean, well, when I worked for a couple of CEOs, for global companies who, and partly I was part of their speechwriter as well, but they taught me something too. I had a CEO in a major company that I worked for, and what he did was he decided that even though the external audience is very important to a company, he believed that it was the internal audience, the employees, that were more important. So he wanted his presentations, he wanted to relate to them as much as the outside world, which most organizations relate to the inside, to their external audience, the stakeholders, which are very important, by the way. But he wanted to relate to the internal audience, and he made his messages personal. So when they finished, he used to give an update every quarter on the company's results and where they were. And he would meet them. He'd also videotape them and send them around the world, to a large extent. And the value that he had was his message clearly was, you are important. You're part of this organization, part of this culture. I count on you, and I want you to help us succeed. And the fact that he did that in such an impressive way always made me feel good because I mean, even though I was part of the team, he was making his employees feel top of the line, and I think that worked for the company's culture and organization and
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was certainly going to warm up that segment of the audience. It's almost like a concert. Many years ago, I saw Michael Jackson in concert. I had pretty much top row in an arena behind the stage. Okay.
yeah,
Great tickets. But I will tell you that I do remember him just for a moment or two turning and acknowledging the back of the stage, basically, where we weren't going to see most of him for, we'd see 5% of his face.
right.
And you know what? I never forgot it because I felt included at that moment. So I get the point you're making. How about, let's stay on this audience.
Yeah.
I think some presenters may get a little bit anxious. I'm not fond of the word nervous, but let's use the word anxious about these types of people. Now, my dad, who was a Marine, his favorite line
Congratulations.
was,
Well, you should thank him for his service.
I sure did many times, fought in two major wars,
Yeah.
hit the beach at Omaha, but I digress. I remember his, for a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, hitting me with, see that guy over there? He puts his pants on the same way you do, one leg at a time. Okay, so we'll start with that one. But any thoughts to somebody who's got high stakes, big, important audience out there, just to kind of knock that anxiety down just a hair?
It's fascinating in different methodologies that are used. I mean, I think one of the ways is to obviously think about your mindset going in. Um, if you have a nervous mindset, you're going to be nervous in the presentation itself. So you need to start with a mindset fixed in the beginning to say,
Mhm.
what is it that I have? And then there are obviously techniques. I think the idea that you've heard it and you know well, the idea of deep breathing before, I think is a good tool because what it does is it sets your metabolism and your system to some extent, so it lowers your anxiety level to a large degree. And then one of the biggest things I think is over time is having vision, and you've heard of this too, and your speakers have, and you have, is the idea of visualization of the presentation before you do it. If you think about your presentation and you visualize it in some way, by the time you get there, you may actually be you may actually feel a lot better because you've actually almost did it before. You've almost done the presentation. And having visualized it and having connected it to your mind, it's going to make it a lot easier for you when you go in to do it. Now, you may have to make some adjustments, obviously. Not every visualization is going to be perfect, but the fact that you visualized it and the fact that you put it in your subconscious mind to get there, when you get to that presentation, you're going to feel a lot better and stronger, and I think you'll perform better as well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I also, I used to be a distance runner, and I would not have a beer 2 months before a race. I had
Yeah,
all kinds of kooky things, and people would say, "That really make you faster?" And when I was the unconscious competent, I think I don't know.
yeah,
It just felt like the right thing to do, but I realized what it really was doing was removing doubt. Uh,
yes,
because when we don't prep for a presentation the way we should, when we go out with that company the night before and have a drink, maybe two, when we're doing things like that, will it take away from the presentation? Maybe not. But will it introduce doubt into the mind? Maybe so. And so I really think, we do the best we can of knocking that doubt down.
that's a very good point, and I think taking the doubt out or trying to at least reduce it. I think there's another argument to be made that having a certain amount of minimal anxiety is not a bad idea
Yeah.
either,
Right.
because what it does is it raises your adrenaline level. You don't want to go in too soft.
Right.
You want to have enough adrenaline and enough to move you forward in your presentation, but you don't want it. You want it to do it in enough way, in an easy way, so that it doesn't overtake you, but it makes you stronger.
Yeah. And that's why, I sort of alluded earlier where I said, don't like the word nervous. I don't use the word nervous. Somebody says I get nervous. No, you don't. You get anxious. I want to swap that word out because nervous I can't use.
Right.
That's me chewing my nails. but anxious. Well, I see a racehorse getting ready to be loaded into a stall that's anxious. You know why? It's about ready to run a race, but not nervous. So I'm with you. If we actually swap that word out and realize that it's expected, and I'm hoping we've got a couple butterflies. We know
Yeah.
one thing: we're not going to be flat. So yeah, let's not fight that word. It's okay. It's to be expected and maybe welcomed a little bit. I'm
Right.
with you. Let me shift you over because I know you do some facilitation as
Yeah.
well.
Right.
As a facilitator,
Yeah.
how do you balance control of the room? I mean, you got to be flexible when unexpected moments happen. See, if all you're doing is talking to an audience, unless the lights go out, you're in pretty good shape. But facilitation is like an improv.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the unexpected moments?
That's a very good question, and they do show up, obviously.
Yeah.
I think there's a secret to this, Rob, and if I can, or partly it's so part secret that may work as a facilitator. Certainly, you need to have worked out a good agenda with the people who are going to charge of the organization that are doing that. That's certainly a no-brainer, and you need to have a list of the people and know who they are, etc. So that's a starting point, and maybe even a little bit about their philosophy in terms of where they are. But the secret is when we get into these facilitations or even high stakes presentations, what we forget is that of these impromptu moments that we have, most of these facilitations are connected to impromptu moments. Somebody raises the hand and says, I really don't understand, why are you presenting that in a particular way, in that particular area? That's called impromptu. It's coming up out of nowhere, in terms of the overall activity. Or you've mentioned this, but we don't operate that way in terms of the overall activity. And what you need to have is you need to have a structure to handle impromptu moments. You need to be able to think through. Now you need to buy some time. So you may be saying to yourself, okay, what's the problem solution benefit of this? How can I answer this with a problem solution and benefit, so that I don't throw myself way off? I'll give them the problem that they just mentioned. I'll give them a selected solution, and I'll give them a benefit that's connected. And so you look at these impromptu moments that you have, but you have a structure in your brain that allows you to connect to them in a particular way. There was a famous thing I think I read somewhere or looked at somewhere where they were saying three things: what, so what, and what now, which is critical. So if you ask what's happening, so what does this mean, and what now, you can then look at that situation and come into it that way. But what's the problem? So what does it mean? And what now, you can then address that particular facilitation or audience in a particular way so that you can help them uh, move forward in terms of your overall activity. So having these what I call unstructured moments quietly in your brain, structured, that you have, okay, when this comes up, I may use this heuristic, I may use this approach, I may use this tactic, I may use this particular uh, analysis to get through it. And that way it'll get you through. And then, of course, if you have somebody who is completely trying to take control of it, you have to, what you can do, what you can often do is pause. Okay, use the famous pause. Okay, bring up something quickly, and in worst case scenarios, call for a break,
Right.
which then stops the whole process indirectly, even though you do it subtly, in terms of the overall effort, so that you're um, in effect slowing it down, and then initiating a break so that this person has the time to cool off or do something else, or work out the process. So you don't have to directly confront them if that's possible, because confronting doesn't work.
Right.
If you confront an audience member or a team member directly, then you've gotten into their game, not your game.
Right, right. Yeah, we have dueling knuckleheads now.
Right.
And it's interesting. You took that question and you sort of moved it to the most difficult part of that impromptu moment, which is what we call everybody has their own name. I've always referred to it as snipers, uh,
Yeah.
because they're not taking a clean shot. They're hiding behind the audience,
Right.
and it's very subtle. we could do a whole show on that. I'd like to start with just, I'll just add, the only thing I'm going to add is just don't overreact because sometimes people say things and it comes out wrong and they
Right.
really don't mean it that way. And we're already implementing, okay, strategy 4, 7, and 8 for sniper activity. And sometimes my motto is first one's free.
Right.
Okay. Second one, we may have breaks. It's so many different
Yeah.
relays, reverses, so many moves. But I think if people walk away with an idea on this one from my angle, it's just remember sometimes people say things, it just doesn't come out right. It doesn't feel good on your end. It's awkward. It's clunky. It takes the breath out of the room a little bit. But rise above it, keep going. And that might very well be the end of it just there.
Yes, and as you said, you brought it up beautifully in terms of how that's to be handled, and another way might be too. Let me understand what I think you're saying is this, you know, which means now you're giving the person a connection to what. Let me understand what you just said. Are you referring to this, and now the person thinks, well, okay, he acknowledges that I have said something that he recognizes, or I paraphrase what he said
Yeah.
in a particular way, so
Yeah.
that he now he says to himself, okay, I may be willing to talk about this in a less hostile way. But you're not
Right.
sure yet. You have to see when it comes out.
Yeah.
But sometimes if you have them rephrase it or you paraphrase the remark in a particular way so that you get them to think about it, then you can get them to move maybe in a different direction.
Well said. And like I said, I'm making a promise to this audience. I'll do a piece on snipers for you if you'd like, because
That's important.
this
Everybody needs to
really.
know about that.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, because
Yeah.
I got to tell you, Robert, if I could look into the future for any newer speaker in particular, but really any speaker, and say, I just was in the future, I saw your presentation, and nobody had an issue. Imagine what that would do to our confidence level. Well, let's do the second best thing and say that let's prepare ourselves with the most intelligent strategy so we're not thrown if the worst thing that could happen happens. And oh, by the way, at least from my desk, if I'm doing 50 presentations a year, I get sniped, I mean, officially sniped once every 2 years at best. It doesn't happen as often as we think. We
Right.
tend to overreact and think it's happening. All right, I got one last question for you.
Yeah.
For anybody who's facing a high pressure talk, what's the best advice that you can give if they pick up one thing from you today? What would be that one thing? I got a high pressure presentation. Here's the one thing I want you to remember.
The Simon Sinek said something that I think was very important. He said they won't buy they don't buy what you know. They want to know why you know it.
Right.
In other words, they don't buy what or let me put it up. They don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it. And the question is very important distinction. They don't want to know what they care what you do, but I mean, but why you do it is more critical. And I think Sinek was very right about that, and because he's written books about that on why you should use that. But the critical question is why do you, if you can tell them why you do it, as opposed to what you, then I think they'll come along and be part of your team.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, give me the name of that book again.
The book is Leveraging Your High Stakes Presentations in the Age of Speed
Okay.
by Kendall Hunt Publisher. Of course, Robert Petrausch is the author, but
Yeah.
yeah, they could that's it. And the ebook is cheaper than the hardcover book, so ebook
Hmm.
is much a much better
Okay.
deal
All
than
right.
get
Well,
one.
either
Yeah.
way, we folks, we know where to find it. And my audience, I have to teach this audience, but my audiences know you're only half done when you get a book. You read
Oh,
that book
right. Oh,
and
yeah.
then write a review on the book. It's the nicest thing you can do for an author, and it really matters on the Amazon algorithm and all that. So let's get that book, and then let's really put the cherry on the sundae and write a nice review on it. How do people get a hold of you, Robert?
Well, they can call me. The easiest way I'm on LinkedIn
Hmm.
easily, so that my Robert, you can get me directly through LinkedIn. My webs my email is Petrausch Petrausch at sbcglobal.net. So it's Petrausch Petrausch at sbcglobal.net. through LinkedIn is probably the quicker way. But either way, I'll be happy to answer any inquiries or follow up with you in any way that we have that
Perfect.
they want to know about.
Perfect. And I don't think you're going to be battling a whole lot of Petrausches in that LinkedIn. So just remember Petrausch.
Robert, yeah.
Robert. Well, if they get that last name, unless you got a cousin, I think we'll get close with that one.
I hope so. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Listen, been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I really like, it's funny when we were talking and I met Robert through LinkedIn myself. I was thinking, this high stakes thing really intrigued me. I think he did a beautiful job of putting some great information under it. And I'm pleased to really have had you on the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Hey, listen, thank you for having me. You're doing a great service to professional speakers and facilitators with your show. I think people need to learn more about this, and one of the best ways is through a podcast. So
Yeah.
I currently recommend. I hope that your audience and recommends to their friends your show and your podcast because it has a lot to offer for professionals like myself and others.
Wow. Well said. Now, see what Robert just did? He just got an invite in about a year to be back on the show. I can't turn that down. Thank you so much for saying that. Anyway, great meeting you, Robert.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your show. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you.
You bet. All right. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow, rate, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. For more resources and to connect with Rob, visit thepresentationwhisperer.com.